Natural Habitat Adventures is pleased to be bringing you this webinar, Discover the Wild Side of Scotland. And we are broadcasting today live from Scotland, and I'd like to introduce you to our presenters today. I'd like to start by introducing you to Warwick Lister Kay. He was born in the Highlands and brought up in Angus. And at 19, he mustered sheep and cattle in Western Australia and the Northern Territory for a year before returning to Britain and starting a career as an officer in the British Army. He served for 6 years with the Highlanders, during which time he negotiated sensitive disarmament agreements with bands of militia in the hills of Kosovo and patrolled Northern Ireland before the ceasefire and trained hundreds of recruits. He has traveled extensively and has led groups and lectured on cruise ships from around South America, Antarctica, the Mediterranean, and elsewhere. And he ran his own company in South America for 5 years. Warwick rejoined the family business in 2008, and he spends his time, his spare time, I should say, exploring his passion for the wild mountainous terrain of the Highlands. And he is also a professional photographer and keen paraglider, and I'm pretty sure we will get to enjoy some of his beautiful photography today. Your other presenter today is Jonathan Willett, and Jonathan gained an expansive knowledge and understanding of Scotland's wildlife and habitats while getting his bachelor's degree in zoology, his master's degree in ecology, and spending time in the field. He furthered his education by volunteering on nature reserves and then began his guiding career in 1995 with 2 summers at Angus Field Center outside Inverness. He continued leading groups in a variety of settings until 2006, when he realized a lifelong dream by starting Red Kite Tours, his own guiding company. His main interest lies in experiencing and sharing his knowledge of wildlife with travelers, but he also uses folklore, geology, and place names of the Highlands to help travelers gain a full understanding of the exceptional landscape and the animals who call it home. And in 2014, Jonathan qualified as a Scottish Tour Guide Association Blue Badge Tourist Guide, which is a feat that requires a great deal of study time equivalent to earning a master's degree. So we are in good hands today with Jonathan and with Warwick, and I would like to turn it over to you, gentlemen, and I believe we're going to hear from you first, Warwick, correct?
That's right, Lee. Thank you very much for your introduction. I'm going to speak very, very briefly, and then I'm going to hand over to Jonathan. I've just returned from the west coast of Scotland, where I've been out with a group today. And you know, it's very timely because I'm reminded how unbelievably fortunate I am and we are to live in this spectacular country. And on a day like today, when we had a beautiful autumn day, that was more true than ever before. Really, the sun was shining, the mountains were clear of cloud. We went for a long walk in Glentorridon. We were able to watch white-tailed eagles and red deer just as they're congregating before the rut. And, you know, I really believe that on a day like today there is something exceptional and special about the landscape and wild environment of the Highlands of Scotland. And particularly over on the west coast, along the coast there, there are these spectacular sea lochs with little, kind of quaint little settlements strung out along them. We were able to take the vehicle up to a high mountain pass and look across the North Sea towards the Isle of Skye and Rasay and Rum, just as the sun was dipping into the west, and it was just absolutely breathtaking. I'm moved every time I travel through that landscape, and you know, of course, we're fortunate to see in it some wonderful wildlife as well. And I'm really, really excited to have the opportunity to share that with our Natural Habitat Adventure guests. I strongly believe that this is one of the most beautiful places in the world, and that in the right hands you can fully access that and understand our history here as well as the landscape and wildlife. And you know, as I was reminded today as I took a group of American guests around the west coast, our history is of course very strongly linked with your history, and thousands of people left the glens in the 18th and 19th century and traveled across the Atlantic to the Americas, and we always have quite a number of American guests who are really interested in that period in Scottish history, and that's something that we like to talk about a fair bit while watching for wildlife. Now, that's enough for me. I'm going to hand over to Jonathan. Before I do, I just want to say a couple of words about him, because I know that he's too modest to big himself up. Jonathan started working for us almost 20 years ago, and since then he's been working for us on and off, training our staff and also taking our guests out around the Highlands, simultaneously acquiring the various qualifications that you heard in the introduction, and working for the local Highland Council as the biodiversity officer. I honestly believe there is no man in the Highlands of Scotland who knows the wildlife of this particular area better than Jonathan does. And as a long-standing and trusted member of staff, I know that there are no better hands into which I could put our NatHab guests, and I'm delighted to have him on board. There you go, Jonathan.
Well, thank you very much for that, Warwick. It's very, very kind words indeed. Well, I'm going to take you on a bit of a tour of the Highlands. You'll see some pictures of the different species of wildlife that we potentially can see, will see in our trips. And also we'll have a look at some of the landscapes that we'll be travelling through. There's not a huge number of landscape pictures, and that is deliberate because I don't want to colour your ideas of what you might get to see. As Warwick described, the sunset today was absolutely spectacular on the west coast, but equally if it's cloudy it can still be amazing. When it's got the mist, we have amazing atmospheric views that you can see when we travel through the glens and along the coasts. And really people say, you know, what's the best time to come to Scotland? Well, the best time to come to Scotland is now, and the next best time is to come again after you've been for the first time. Really because Scotland, as you may have heard, does have slightly changeable weather, but that's what makes things interesting, because literally no day is ever the same. The views are different, the wildlife is different, and that's really part of what makes Scotland a very, very, very special place. But to start, we will spend time on boats. There's a couple of longer ferry trips that we'll take. They take about just about an hour and a half. So there's the opportunity for sea watching. We travel from the mainland of Scotland over to the Western Isles. There's also a shorter boat trip that we'll take over to the island of Handa to go and see some fantastic seabirds. And we've also got a private boat hire that will take us into the Cromarty Firth and out into the North Sea, and that will give us the opportunity to look for bottlenose dolphins. And one of the things that really attracted me to guiding on this particular tour was the amount of time that we do spend on boats. Obviously there's a lot of terrestrial wildlife to go and see, but then when you're out in boats, then you've always got the chance of something popping its head up, or perhaps seeing a fin, and you just never know quite what's going to come up. And really the highlight, I would say, from last year, from this year, from a lot of the guests, was actually watching gannets fish when we were on the private boat tour on the Western Isles. And it was absolutely spectacular. We were there about 15 minutes just watching all these gannets, you know, flying up high, northern gannets, and then plunging down. And it was just mesmeric, just seeing them hit the water again and again and again. And these are the sorts of sightings that you can't get from land. You have to be out in a boat. And we do have some really special boat trips that we go on. Of course, we might get to see some razorbills, and we'll get to see the largest razorbill colony in the whole of the British Isles, which is on the island of Handa, which is a big lump of Torridonian sandstone. So it's about 1,000 million years old, the sandstone there. It's about a 10-minute boat trip from the mainland, and we'll go on a walk round about the island. It's quite a short walk. It's only sort of 2 to 3 miles. We'll see some fantastic bird breeding cliffs, lots of razorbills, guillemots, and of course the very charismatic puffin, which everybody enjoys having a look at. There's also jaegers that breed on the island. We call the jaegers the skua. So we have Arctic skuas, and we also have the great skuas. But no one usually calls the great skua the great skua. It tends to be called the bonksy, which is the local name, which seemingly means dumpy bird. So it's a kind of quite a robust sort of gull-sized large gull that's quite something to go and see. And these bird colonies that we have in Scotland are really amazing. Scotland's got over 40% of the seabirds that we find in the whole of the European Union, and it's because we have these wonderful sea cliffs. And on the island of Handel, we can actually get really, really close to both see the birds, but also we get to smell the birds as well, because obviously with a large colony, you get quite a lot of guano. And so it's not just a visual sensation, but it's an olfactory sensation as well. And of course, the grassland that we have on the island of Handa has got fantastic wildflowers as well. So it's not just looking at the birds, it's really whatever we're going to see in front of us. So it's the flowers, the plants, the trees, the fungi if there's any out, the lichen, and we look at really all sorts of different things. And all sorts of the wildlife, both the plants, the animals, they all seek to make up the habitat that we're travelling through. And obviously human beings have had a great impact upon the habitat, and there's a big, big story to tell about that in the Highlands of Scotland. Some of it quite recent, the changes, both for good and bad, but also some of them go back hundreds of years. Now if we're really lucky, we'll get to see the gannet diving, and if you're incredibly lucky, you might get a picture of it just before it hits the water. But this particular picture was taken by a man called Laurie Campbell, who is one of our preeminent wildlife photographers. And he's managed to capture a fourth-year gannet just as it's about to enter the water. And these northern gannets can dive maybe up to 60 miles an hour and smack straight into the water. And then they'll go and sometimes dive after fish, or they can actually actively swim underwater to go and hunt. And it really is quite a spectacular sight to see. And if you're fortunate enough, you can get close enough to the gannets, you can actually hear the impact. Which is really, really quite something. Now I did mention that we were taking a boat out into the Cromarty Firth from the small village of Cromarty, which is an absolutely fantastically well preserved, late 1700s, early 1800s village. Lots of really interesting buildings there, lots of ship captains came from Cromarty, so there's some very, very grand buildings that we can find. And it's also incredibly well preserved. But Cromarty is probably best known for being a very good place to go and see dolphins. Eco Ventures, who are the charter company that we use, will give us exclusive use of their boat, and we'll get to go out into the sea to go and look for dolphins. Now, we may not get to see a dolphin eating a very large salmon. The fishermen always groan when they see a salmon this size getting eaten by a dolphin, but that's the main reason why bottlenose dolphins congregate round about Cromarty. As you can hear, we have a bit of wildlife in the office. This is Gaucho, who's Warwick's dog. So we are live here. It's definitely, it's not pre-recorded. So the bottlenose dolphins congregate in the summertime to go and feed on the salmon. And the salmon run that goes past, we can't see it because it's all underwater, but the dolphins definitely know that it's there. And on the day that we go to Cromarty, we've got opportunity to see the bottlenose dolphins both in the boat, but there's also a spot of land that we'll go on to called Chanonry Ness, which is the best site in the whole of Europe to go and watch bottlenose dolphins. So we've got a very good chance to go and see these spectacular animals. There's just over 200 of these individuals, and we know there's over 200 because they've been photo-identified by Aberdeen University over the last 27 years now. So a very, very long photo identification study has gone on. And we know that the numbers are actually gradually increasing, which is really good news. Now, if you've ever seen a bottlenose dolphin in Florida, they're about half the size of the bottlenose dolphins that we have up here. Because the water is so much colder, our dolphins have to be that much bigger and also have lots more blubber to go and keep themselves warm. So they really are a spectacular large animal. Now, I did feel the need to put in at least one landscape. There is another one coming up. This is a beach on Harris, and Harris is one of the Western Isles. It's almost part of the island of Lewis, and there's a there's quite a large isthmus between the two islands. But the people of Harris are very, very different from the people of Lewis, and don't confuse the two because they don't like that. But the beaches of Harris are absolutely amazing. As you can see, in a beautiful sunny day, we've got these golden sands, we've got the wonderful sand dune vegetation there, and really it is quite breathtaking. The other thing that's breathtaking about it is the water. So if you ever feel the temptation to go for a paddle, the water will take your breath away. But that's part of the fun of it. The beaches are incredibly deserted here. If they were in the Pacific, they would be very heavily developed and there'd be lots and lots of people there. The picture you can see just now, this is actually a crowded beach on Harris, and there's about, 10 people that are there. So the beaches that we have there are not just spectacular, but they're also, we have them pretty much to ourselves. And we're very fortunate to be able to travel to a few different beaches, both by land but also by sea, and to really appreciate the true spectacular nature of them. And there's a wonderful, wonderful beach in a bay called Loch towards the south of Harris, which really is absolutely spectacular and has to be seen to be believed. And of course we might see some denizens of the shallows, so we might see an otter. Now our otters are found both in the sea and in fresh water, so they're the Eurasian otter. And our otters that we find in the sea are actually river otters that have adapted to go and forage in the sea. But they must come back to fresh water to go and wash all the salt out of their fur. So they're not like the sea otter of your west coast that can live all of its life in the water. These are freshwater animals that have adapted to live in the sea. Now we'll spend certainly time having a close look, and round about the coastline of Harris is a very good place to go and see otters. But they can be elusive, so we'll have to be patient. But we're very hopeful that we'll get some good sightings of the otters. Often at the time that we are going, particularly in the latter trip, that will be going in July, the females will be out with cubs, so there's the opportunity of perhaps seeing 2, and if we're very lucky, maybe even 3 otters, perhaps a mother with a couple of kits with her. The otters are really one of the creatures that people really, really want to see, and they can be elusive, but we've got opportunities on the mainland as well to do a little bit of otter watching too. So it won't just be on the islands, it'll also be on the land. Actually underneath a bridge, believe it or not, but you'll have to come on the trip to find out which bridge that is. Now, of course, in the Western Isles, one of the big draws, both in terms of its fame, but also in its size, is the sea eagle, which, depending on which measurement you take, is the 4th largest eagle in the world. I'm prepared to debate this, but it all depends: is it weight, is it wingspan, is it overall height? But it really is a hugely spectacular bird, very closely related to the bald eagle, so very, very similar head shape to it. And when it gets older, the head almost goes completely white. It's more of an off-white, a sort of a beige white. But the older the eagle gets, the paler the head, similar to with the bald eagle. And seeing these eagles flying about is really, really something. They are huge. You've seen a bald eagle, they're a similar size, a little bit larger. And also there's a fascinating story behind them, because they were only reintroduced back into Scotland in 1975. Which might not sound like quite recently, but in terms of a bird that will live for over 30 years and only starts breeding when it's 5 or 6, it's not actually that long at all. And we're very fortunate that the sea eagle population is increasing, and we now have nearly 100 territorial pairs of sea eagles, with over half of them that are breeding. So from being completely exterminated in 1918, there was no sea eagles in Scotland. Now we've got a population, we reckon, of over 200, between about 200 and 300 individuals, which is really good news. Now, one of the birds that we can see in great abundance over in the Western Isles, and also over in the various freshwater lochs that we go and visit, is what we call the red-throated diver, which is a loon. You can see its red throat there, very well illuminated. And usually we have lots of debates about how red the red throat is, because the redness of the throat depends very much on the light. So sometimes it can appear very, very dark and doesn't really have a colour to it at all, but it is red, honestly. There's a couple of thousand of these birds that we find nesting in upland freshwater lakes and ponds, really, so large ponds they will go and breed in. And amazingly, they will go and fly out to sea, maybe up to 4 times a day, to go and feed their young. So they use their nesting territory of a fresh water just to have their nest and to have a safe place to raise their young. They don't actually feed on these particular fresh waters. They have to go out to sea to go and do that. And that means that often we can see them flying about with the characteristic drooping head that they have and the sort of goose-like call that they make. And one of their local names is the rain goose. Now, over in the Western Isles, we're very fortunate to have a good population of hen harriers, and this is again one of the birds that we'll be looking out for. This is a female that we've got flying towards us. The male is a pale grey colour with black wingtips, and really a very spectacular bird, but as is the female as well. And if we get a view like this coming towards the minibus, then I'll be a very pleased guide indeed. Now, of course, it's not just watching wildlife or looking at the flowers or taking boat trips. There's always plenty of time to go and look around. And this was one of this year's Natural Habitat Adventures groups, and you can see there was lots to see because no one is actually looking in the right direction. Oh well, they're not looking, they're obviously looking in the right direction, but they're just not looking in the same direction. There was a bit of a story about this particular picture. One of the ladies, sort of on the far left-hand side of your picture, seemed very keen on looking at the beach, and we were saying, oh, have you got some interesting birds there? And they said, no, it was just a man who was skinny dipping. So that's why she was obviously keen to go and look through the telescope. But there is lots and lots to go and see, and we certainly do encourage our guests to go and look around whenever we're walking or when we're travelling in the minibus, because there's lots of things that we will point out, but there's obviously points of interest that you may be intrigued in or want to go and hear more about. And certainly my job as a guide is to try and answer as many questions as I can. And I really enjoy doing that. I really encourage being asked questions. I really encourage people to spot things and to go and tell me what they've seen and to try and ask me questions about it. Because that not only helps me learn more as a guide, and as a guide you're always learning. The man who knows everything knows nothing, I think as a famous Chinese philosopher said. And you're constantly learning, and really people's questions help guide the way that you will do your guiding commentary. And as you've read my biography, you'll know I can talk quite a lot about quite a lot of different things. So really picking up on people's key interests and trying to discuss them and to talk about things that are interesting to my guests is something that I really always try and do. And of course, the more time you spend looking around, the more likely you are to see lots of different things. Now, one of the habitats that we do have in Scotland, which is relatively rare, it doesn't cover a huge area, are the native pine woods that we have. And we will do a little bit of exploration through some of the native pine woods that we have, both over on the west coast, and also some of the pine woods that we have closer to here at Agasfield Centre, where we're giving this presentation from. Now, of course, the landscape is constantly changing with the light. The light you'll find constantly changes, so if you're a keen photographer, take a few lenses with you, maybe a few filters as well, because you will get constantly changing light. There's a school of artists known as the Glasgow Boys who were painting in the early 1900s, and there was one individual in particular that painted over on the west coast on an island called Iona, and he didn't paint anywhere else. He just painted again and again similar scenes, not always exactly the same, and the reason he felt that he never needed to move away from Scotland or even from Iona was simply because the light was different all the time. And that's something that you'll find, and it's something that, if you live in the in the Rockies where you get 300 days of sunshine a year, the light's not always that different. But in Scotland you can get changing light conditions from hour to hour, often from minute to minute, and that's one of the things that makes the landscape so spectacular. Sometimes it's well hidden away, but sometimes you get some spectacular reveals. You can get amazing rainbows, you can get amazing misty shots. And that's something that we're very, very fortunate in having. And it's the reason why many artists come over to the West Coast and also over to the Western Isles. And when we're travelling around about the Western Isles, you'll see lots and lots of art galleries, and we might have the opportunity to pop in to one or two. And of course, there's the opportunity to go to a blind, what we call a hide. and we'll go and look out for the nocturnal activities of the badger. So here you can see a beautiful picture of a badger with its wonderful stripy face and its thick fur coat. They really are very, very charismatic animals, and we'll spend up to maybe 2 hours in a blind looking out for these particular animals. And going out at night time is obviously you're using different senses because you can't see that well, but obviously we can hear. So some of the things that we can hear, often we can hear owls hooting away. This year we had youngsters that were calling. And also there's all sorts of sounds that we'll hear when we're in the blind. Now the blind itself is all enclosed, the window's open, but it is very comfortable, and it's really quite something just to sit there so quiet and so patiently. There's also the opportunity for photography there as well. So again, if you're a keen photographer, we'll give you a bit of a talk on how to take the photographs and how the blind will work. But there is illumination there that doesn't spook the animals, and some people got some really, really nice shots. Also some nice video as well of the various different types of behaviour. Now, of course, it's not just badgers that could appear. It could be, we got brown hare this year as well, but we also got Pine Marten quite regularly. And these are a member of the mustelid family, so they're related to a fisher, if you're familiar with that creature. They are the only mustelid with semi-retractable claws, and that's because they spend a lot of their time climbing trees. They're very much generalist predators, but they do specialise on small birds, nestlings, eggs, and also red squirrels, if they can actually go and catch them. But the red squirrels are very, very good at running away from the Pine Marten. The Pine Marten is another success story, because its numbers were probably down to maybe about 1,500, 1,500 just after the First World War, and they were only found west of the Great Glen, so west of a line between Fort William and Inverness. Now they've spread all over Scotland, so you can find them all the way down to the border with England. They've spread over the border, and very small populations in the north of England and also in the north of Wales are starting to expand. And one of the things we have very few of overall in Britain are predators, simply because of the Victorian estate management tended to get rid of most of the predators as vermin. So it's really a really good story to see the Pine Martens making a comeback. And they're actually capturing Pine Martens in this area, and they're translocating them to the south of Wales to go and augment the population there, to go and help it to expand all over the British Isles. But the Pine Martens are fantastic to go and see close up, especially if you've got two siblings. This year we got to see some squabbling and playing with each other, and also having a bit of a hiss when they were having a bit of a disagreement as to whose peanut was whose. Now, when we're out in some of the larger lochs, we'll be keeping our eyes peeled for this particular individual. These are, well, the Pacific loon or the Arctic loon. These breed very high up in the northern part of North America. In Scotland, they do breed on larger lochs, on larger lakes that have sufficient fish that the birds can go and catch enough fish to sustain themselves, but also their chicks. And they do have, for my money, one of the most spectacular plumages of any bird. This amazing pinstriping that they have on the side of the neck and on their breast, and then they have that wonderful sort of like square pattern on the back, and this beautiful red eye, and almost a grey head that looks as if it's a very, very fine suede. We'll endeavour to get some good looks at these particular individuals, and they really are spectacular birds. We have less than 200 pairs that breed in Scotland, and they signify really a very substantial proportion of the European population, because elsewhere they breed much higher up in Europe, so they're in places like in Scandinavia, and they can be really quite difficult to see. But Scotland again is one of the best places to go and see them, really relatively easily if you're knowing where to look. But just gives an example of some of the spectacular bird life that we do have here. Now, of course, whenever we're travelling about, we'll be scanning very closely for a golden eagle. Actually, this year we didn't quite have one this close, but we did have one pretty close when we were on the island of Harris, and we had an absolutely amazing sighting as one flew over the minibuses we were travelling along. These are the king of the birds. They've never gone extinct in Scotland because they nest in very inaccessible territories. even though the numbers went down to probably less than 100 pairs over 150 years ago. And now the population is about 450 pairs, but they can really be quite elusive. But we will endeavour to scan the skylines and have a good look for these birds. And really, when you do get to see them, when they're soaring, or if you're even incredibly fortunate get to see them hunting, they are really, truly awesome birds. They are spectacular. And it's one of the birds that people, are really keen to go and see in Scotland. And they're not as easy to see as you think, but if you know where to look and you keep scanning, then usually you've got a very good chance. And we've got a chance over in the Western Isles, particularly in Harris. There's a good population there, but also where we'll be staying on the mainland at the Cool House Hotel, which does a fantastic scone, or scone, depending on how you pronounce it. Just very close to there, it can be an hour away, and we've got the opportunities for some eagle watching. Now, of course, there's majestic stags, which are closely related, or the same species as your elk, just not quite the same size. But you know what they say, everything's larger in the States. But the red deer stags, again, are a real icon for Scotland, made very famous in the Victorian era in the mid-1800s. The painting of Monarch of the Glen by Edwin Landseer really is kind of a defining statement for the Highlands. And the sporting culture of the Highlands is something that we will discuss, because it's had a huge impact on the landscape that we see. It can't be underestimated just how sporting estates have influenced the landscape and the way that it looks, and I'll do my very best to go and explain exactly how that's happened. But the red deer population that we have is one of the things that really comes out of that estate management, and it's one of the things that we'll go and discuss. But seeing red deer stags in their full summer coat, this wonderful brick red colour, the velvet's coming off the antlers, we see some fantastic racks of antlers. It really is quite something to go and see, and again we've got good opportunities for seeing the red deer, both at a distance, no doubt, but also perhaps a little bit closer as well. Now, of course, if you've got hunting and shooting, you're going to have some fishing, but we won't be fishing, admittedly, but we might be going to look for some fish. And here we can see a couple of Atlantic salmon leaping at a place called the Falls of Shin. And it's probably one of the biggest natural soap operas ever, is to go and watch salmon leaping. It's will they, won't they. Sometimes they'll leap up and they'll leap into the wrong part of the stream and they'll get washed back down again. Sometimes they'll leap up into the top of the waterfall and then they'll manage to power their way up through the flow of water and then on to their spawning grounds. Really is a fantastic story to be told about the Atlantic salmon. And also the landscape that they're travelling through and all the travails and the obstacles that they have to get over. But also bear in mind that these salmon have run past the bottlenose dolphins. They haven't been eaten, and they're making their way all the way up to their spawning grounds in the gravel-rich streams in the very upland catchments. So we'll be going to a place to go and watch some salmon leaping, and of course we can tell the story about them. We don't have the same numbers of salmon as in the Pacific. We used to, about 250 years ago. The single species of Atlantic salmon that we have in Scotland, and there was massive runs, but those numbers have declined. But one of the things about Scotland and its Atlantic salmon is the genetic diversity of these salmon. If you go to continental Europe, you pretty much get one type of Atlantic salmon going all the way from the north of Portugal, the north of Spain, all the way to the Rhine, where there's big runs of Atlantic salmon. But they're all pretty much genetically the same. In Scotland, because the landscape is so different and there's isolation, you get a huge amount of genetic diversity. And that's one of the things that make the Atlantic salmon in Scotland so very important. Now, I did mention Cool House Hotel. It's got some lovely home baking and really fantastic food. I can certainly vouch for that. And it's also got a spectacular arboretum. And so we were looking up to the top of a sequoia just as the sun was setting. So a tree that's obviously come from North America and been planted at probably quite a great cost. Probably the seed cost about £800 in the 1870s. But we got a fantastic arboretum in the grounds of the hotel that we're staying in. And we also have a fantastic view over to the hills of Strathconnell and beyond. And the influence of North American trees in Scotland is something that again we'll discuss. There's maybe some surprising trees that you'll find in Scotland that you perhaps wouldn't expect. Now, of course, it's not just big trees and big animals. We do look at the small stuff as well. So this is a wonderful stone chat that we've got. And there's lots and lots of small birds, small mammals if we're fortunate to see them, reptiles as well, and the flowers too. And going even smaller than that, we've got the fungi and the lichen to go and look at. And so it's focusing on really all sorts of wildlife. It's not just focusing on the big things. And often if you move your focus down to at your feet, you start finding all sorts of interesting things. And I really enjoyed that sort of exploration. So yes, there will be a bit of shuffling about looking at our feet and some interesting happening. And of course a bit of beach as well. Now of course, into every holiday some rain must fall, and often it does happen. I'm not going to beat about the bush. It has rained in Scotland before, and on one particular day it was really quite wet, and it was so wet that even the sheep were sheltering inside the bus shelter. Now this was not the only bus shelter that we saw that had sheep in it, but we did see one bus shelter that didn't have sheep in it, and that actually had a sheep gate on it, because obviously the sheep were a bit too enamoured with that particular one. But there's all sorts of interesting things that we can go and find, not just bus shelters with sheep in them rather. We might even be able to go and find may even find some unshorn sheep. But the sheep that we can go and have a look at, there's also Highland cattle as well, and there'll be the opportunity to go and get some pictures of Highland cattle. And there's all sorts of quirky things that we'll find as we travel round about the Highlands and Islands. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you've maybe your interest about Scotland has been piqued, and I'd be delighted if you wanted to come along to Scotland, and I would be very, very happy to go and share it with you if you wanted to come on a Natural Habitats adventure holiday. Just the last slide that we've got here is a rather tatty Scottish flag, the Saltire, and this was flying on a very, very blue sky day over in the Western Isles. So I'll give you all a break, and I'll just hand over to Warwick, and then we'll endeavour to answer the questions that you've got. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was superb. I just want to repeat what I said at the beginning. You know, we consider ourselves incredibly lucky to live in this beautiful landscape, ever-changing, ever-morphing and shifting, home to some wonderful wildlife. And, you know, you couldn't ask for a better person to take you through it and to reveal it to you than Jonathan. You'll be in excellent hands. And with that, I'll hand back to you in the States.
Thank you so much. This has just been a wonderful presentation, and I want to invite our audience to send in questions that you might have. Kendall has been watching for those. She's tagged some for me, but if you have other questions, please send those in now. The question box is over on the right-hand side of the screen. You might need to click the orange button with the white arrow to gain access to that. But we have some birding questions here. We have a question, Warwick, for you, and it is about what is the best time of year for bird watching?
Okay, well, the three departures next year are in May, June and July, and I mean that really is the best time. Of those three departures, I would suggest that May and June are the best for birding. The reason being that it's late spring, early summer. There are less leaves on the trees at that time of year, and so simply the simple fact is that the visibility through woodland is improved. But also it's key breeding time, so the birds are busy establishing and defending territories. They are displaying a great deal in order to attract mates. They're singing vigorously. They're very visible both in the air and at the tops of trees and indeed at the tops of mountains in the case of our eagles. So May and June is always a really busy time for the birds, and you know, July is also excellent. Things tend to quieten down a bit later in the summer once the breeding season's over, sort of August and early September. But all three of those departures are good. May and June probably the best.
All right, and a follow-up to that, we have someone listening who's particularly interested in the Arctic loon. What time of year are those present in Scotland?
Really, all the way from April. Well, they're present all year round, but on the breeding territories, they're present really from the beginning of April to August time. So the time that we have our trips, they will be on their breeding territories on these lakes, so we'll have the opportunity to see them there. We'll also have the opportunity to see them on the sea, because some non-breeding individuals will be still on the sea, probably in the May trip and sometimes into June as well.
Oh, right. Great. Thank you. So we have another question here about the experience. This particular question, it says, we enjoy hiking. How much hiking is involved? Do you get out daily?
There are, I would say maybe every other day, there's the option for, kind of a stretch to the legs, maybe up to an hour or so. But a lot of the places that we're going to, well, certainly Handa, we've got a good chance for a good stretch of the legs. There's a nice walk around Cromarty, and there's a walk up to sea cliffs that you can go and do there. On Harris, we've got a walk on the beach. So I would say every other day, yeah, there'd be a chance for at least an hour's walk.
I just want to chip in on that point. It's very important to me that we are not simply providing a minibus tour, and I always encourage Jonathan and all of our guides to try and get people out of the buses as much as possible. Now, whether or not that's standing beside the road, using the scope to scan the hills and to watch eagles, or indeed going for a walk, will depend on the situation. But I think what's really important for me to tell you, and you may not know this, is that in Scotland there is no law of trespass. We have established, both as a long-standing tradition and as law now, the right to roam wherever we like. And just today I've taken a group of American guests for a 5-mile walk through some spectacular mountain scenery on the west coast. And so what that means is that if, in the evenings, or even if you're an early riser before breakfast, you want to go for a roam around the hotel or along the coast. Some of the hotels we're staying in are in spectacular coastal locations. Then you are absolutely free to do that, and Jonathan will always facilitate that. An early morning stroll along the coast could be one of the best times to try and spot an otter, or to see an otter, for example. And no one is going to tell you to get off their land. That just doesn't happen in Scotland.
All right, thank you very much. So how much time total is spent on the water versus land?
The number of boat trips we've got a 2-hour boat trip, we've got 2 1.5-hour ferry trips, we've got most of the day in a boat's about 4 to 5 hours in a boat, so you're probably looking at 10 hours sea time in the whole holiday.
And some of that is on very small. Well, some of that would be on very small boats. So, for example, when we do the dolphin trip, it's on a rigid inflatable, and it's kind of like the motorbike of the sea. It's quite good fun. We cling on, and the thing can potentially go quite quickly. And we also spend some time in a private launch, which is a relatively large and comfortable boat for probably 15 people. That's the sort of capacity. But then the ferry crossings are on huge vehicle-carrying ferries, which have restaurants and multiple decks, and so they're very, very comfortable and very stable. And certainly for those ferry crossings, unless we have very rough seas, then seasickness is not really too much of a concern.
All right, terrific. Well, that covers it. We've been able to address all of the questions that were submitted. So I will stop with the question and answer and turn it back over to the two of you for any final comments you might have before we go.
Thank you. I don't think we've probably got much to add, other than we're really excited to show you this fantastic place we live in. I consider it a privilege to show guests from all over the world around the Highlands. I truly believe that we live in one of the most beautiful places in the world, and as you heard in my bio, I've been to a few places. We have a special fauna, but as much as seeing the animals themselves, it's the context within which you see them, the mountain landscapes, the coasts, the small communities, the ever-changing light that Jonathan talked about. You know, it's these things that you have to come and see. We can talk about it and show you pictures until the cows come home, but you won't fully and truly appreciate it until you've been here and seen it. And then had a nice scotch at the end of the day as well.
Oh, we didn't talk about the food.
No.
So yeah, needless to say, the standard of food is very, very high.
Yeah.
I want to end on a note of caution, because if you do come on this particular holiday, I have to caution you, you will want to come back to Scotland again. No one that comes on this holiday says, oh well, I've done Scotland. There's so much more to go and see, and it really is, you know, quite an addictive taste once you get here. So I would just like to say, if you are considering coming to Scotland, you know, please do book. You will not be disappointed.
Well, thank you both so much, and we will get the replay handled so that everyone can have access to that. We will send that out by email by about this time tomorrow. And so, gentlemen, we thank you very much for being with us, and we will now conclude our webinar. Goodbye, everyone.
Okay, goodbye.
Thank you.